So good morning, everyone. Today we are going to talk about love. And as Terry was saying, we all have, each one of us, a special talent. But we all share a common talent, which is love. And we live in a world today where we are surrounded by big challenges, tremendous amount of hostility, prejudice, hatred, and not to say that all those things are outside. Love is a challenge for all of us. The proposal that Jesus brought us is way over our heads. We are still struggling very much just to love one another, to love our friends, to love the ones who think like us, to love the ones who share the same ideals of us. And so we still experience what Joanna de Angelis says, a very noble exercises of love, but very, very far away of what love truly means and truly is as it was taught to us by Jesus. Good morning, Elsa. I love you.
I love you too.
Okay. All right. So, today we are going to explore a little bit about the idea of love, since it's such a needed sentiment in our lives, because love is the most powerful force of the universe. Is the one that we are here to learn, and is the one that has the capacity to organize our lives, the capacity to organize our lives both outside and within ourselves. And also is the only force that can help us all to heal. In life is love. No matter how you look at life, love is everywhere. Sandra will agree with me. So we are going to look at a few books to help us to talk about love, and I would like to mention them. One of them is the book Garimpo of Love, Mining of Love, by Joanna de Angelis, which is a precious book. The other one is Pills of Love by André Moreira, which is part of the series of the books Pills of Trust, Pills of Love, and Pills of Hope, which is another very, very precious book. I'm also going to refer to the book Life and Destiny by Leon Denis, which is O Problema do Ser, do Destino e da Dor in Portuguese, and Preludes of the Kingdom by Amélia Rodrigues, which has been translated, and it's an outstanding book translated by Leal Publisher that I recommend for you guys as well. So let's start with Leon Denis. And Leon Denis tells us that it is through love that God created everything. So love is the source, where we come from. But then he goes on to say that when we were created, God gave us the vital principle and the affective principle. So we have both. We have the principle of life and the principle of love within ourselves. And then he goes on to say that this affective principle is meant to grow and to blossom throughout the course of our many lives, of our many incarnations. And that we will acquire our full development. We are going to be holy the day that we understand celestial life. And he says that celestial life is all love. So Denis tells us that we are created from this sentiment, love, that we have in us love in the form of seed, latent, a potentiality. The purpose of our lives is to develop love, is to learn to love in the way that love is expressed, manifested, and lived in the celestial realms. In other words, we are born from it, and the experience of love in its totality is also our final destination. But beyond that, in Genesis, in the chapter that talks about creation, we learn that we were made the image and likeness of God. And how do we understand this statement? So we know better that we are not like God, like a man with beard sitting on a chair, right? So what does that mean? It means that we have God's attributes in ourselves. So in the first question of the Spirit's book, we learn, for instance, that God is the supreme intelligence of the universe. And in question 76 of the Spirit's book, we are going to learn that spirits are defined as intelligent beings of the creation. So like God, we are intelligence. He is the supreme intelligence, and we are the relative intelligences of the universe, like God. But in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, item 8, we learn that whoever does not love God does not know God, because God is love. So God is defined not only as the supreme intelligence, but also love. And in the Gospel, according to Spiritism in chapter 11, it's written that love is the divine essence. And from the beginning to the end, you, us, possess in the depths of our souls the flame of this sacred fire. Meaning that God is love, and we are in essence love. So again, you can look at it from different angles. The source where we come from, what we bring inside, the purpose of our lives is to learn to love. Our essence is love. Our final destination is love. So love is in the air. Why is it important to say that? Because in the midst of our pains, darkness, suffering, struggles, it's very easy and common that we lose sight of the presence of love and the essence of love in our lives. Very good. So, Jesus is our main reference of love. Joana de Angelis, in this book, Mining of Love, she says that Jesus and love are terms of the same reality. So, if you talk love with Jesus, you're talking about the same thing. And so, if we are here, the purpose of our lives is to learn to love, we need to look for a reference. And so, He is the reference. And while He was amongst us, He challenged us in our capacity to love. And at the very end of His life, He made a final invitation to all of us. He said, I invite you to love one another as I have loved you, which is the trickiest part of the statement, right? It's not only to love one another, but do it the way that I did. So the question is, how did He do it? And so we're going to look at 6 passages, 6 references from the Gospel, from the New Testament, to try to understand a little bit the way in which Jesus loved us, so that when we are doing our daily love exercises, we can have the reference in mind and strive towards progressing and evolving and expanding this capacity. Of course, as Leon Denis says, this is something that is an ongoing work on the course of many, many, many incarnations. So no one should feel bad or crucify yourself because you can't love that way quite yet. So in the Gospel, we learn that without charity, there is no salvation. And this is going to bring us the first aspect of God's love, of Jesus' love. Jesus' love is always moving. It's movement. So when we say without charity, there is no salvation, charity is love in action, is love in movement. Charity is when love moves from one point to another point. So this is the first characteristic of Jesus' love. It was constantly moving. It was constantly giving. So much so that when the woman who had been very ill for more than 10 years with this hemorrhage that would not stop She had looked for doctors. She had gone to many different places and persons trying to find the cure for her disease. She felt and she was very conscious that she was sick. She was ashamed. The book Preludes of the Kingdom tells us that she was so conscious of the aversion that people had towards her that she did not want to speak to Jesus, because she was afraid that in speaking to him, people would hear and they would notice her and they would move away from her or push her away. So she decides that she's going to touch his garments. And she does. And because love was constantly moving from him, when she touches, she's healed by their love and movement. And he says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples basically tell him, "What are you saying? Are you crazy? You were in the midst of a huge crowd. Everyone is touching you." But he knew that someone who was ready to be healed had taken from that energy that was constantly being given in her favor in this case. So first characteristic of Jesus' love, it's movement. Second characteristic of Jesus' love. So in Portuguese and also in English, we have verbs. There are transitive verbs or intransitive verbs. And if you don't recall your grammars too well, I will refresh your minds. So intransitive verbs are verbs that do not need a complement. So if I say I arrived or I died, that's it. You died, that's it. There's nothing needs to come after that verb. But if I say I love, you always love someone or something. So there's a complement that comes right after that verb. But Jesus had the capacity to turn a verb that is a transitive verb into an intransitive verb, meaning that Jesus loved, period. Period. We love David, Elcio. Our love has faces. Our love has names. Our love has times, have conditions. Our love have demands. But Jesus' love had none of that. So there was no need of complement. He was love in itself. So with that aspect, the invitation for us is to seek little by little, because this is, again, a work of many incarnations, but I think it's important that we become aware of how conditional our love is. And that we try, little by little, to expand our ability to love beyond the comfortable limits of our close ones, our relatives, our best friends, to include others, particularly the ones who challenge us, particularly the ones who are difficult, who criticize us, so that our ability to love becomes more inclusive, more embracing of others. But beyond that, Jesus' love was the living water. The living water that we learn in the passage of the Samaritan Woman. The living water. So in the book Preludes of Kingdom, the Spirit Amélia Rodrigues tells us that Jesus had traveled more than 50 kilometers from one city to another. And in this trajectory, he was tired, he was thirsty, he had dust all over himself, and he seeks the well of Jacob to rest. So he sits there, and while he's sitting there resting, a woman comes by bringing to draw water at the well. And she comes and she's uneasy inside. She is struggling within herself, and she sees that man sitting there, and he approaches her and he says to her, "Give me water." And And she will say to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" And he says to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who is that asking you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you the living water. Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." So, we know this passage very well, right? We all have probably heard about it. So, did you ever think that the living water is love? And that the Samaritan woman represents all of us with a very arid landscape of our souls, thirsty for water. So what does the water do to the physical body? When you are very thirsty, you feel dry. And if you don't drink for a long time, you feel weak. So when you drink water, pure water, you feel that sense of well-being, of harmony, of homeostasis of your body being reestablished. This is what the love that Jesus offers us do. It irrigates, it transforms the landscapes of our souls. From arid to landscapes, they are more beautiful, like David's backyard, full of fruits, full of flowers, because they get plenty of water, they nourish with love. Think a little bit for a second about the ways in which we love. Do they bring us harmony and peace? A lot of times our love is full of anxiety, it's full of fear of losing. A lot of times it's immersed in jealousy, in conflicts. A lot of times it's a love that is filled with anxiety. So like Suzana de Angelis, the mentor says, noble exercises of love is what we are doing at this time. They are relevant, but still, they are just that, little exercises, because the love as Jesus has offered us is the living water. But there is another reference, right? He says, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. In other words, we spend our lives, because we are thirsty for love, seeking to eliminate our thirst in the wells of the way. A lot of times we drink fluids in the illusion that they will satiate us, and they dehydrate us, like coffee and soda, right? Have you ever been in that place that you were super thirsty and say, "Oh, give me that cold Coca-Cola," right? I've said that so many times in my life. And you drink that, and you have the illusion that you were being satiated, and you're just dehydrating your body. That's what we do. We go on in life looking for water, for love in wells where the water is stagnated, is constricted, and is still. In sources that are unable to provide us with the love that will truly, truly satiate our thirst. Dias da Cruz, in the book Pills of Love, which I'm going to Andres at my house, and I'm going to force him to translate this book, because it's truly, truly a little amazing book. So he says that love is the natural structure that defines the being. Like a water table. So, I don't know if everybody knows with the water table, but the earth, the layers of the earth on the ground, there is this table of water, right? So in Portuguese is lençol freático, which I had to go to the dictionary because I couldn't remember exactly what that was anymore. But so, with that understanding, like a water table nourishes the being from the deepest corners of the soul and arises in the form of blessed spring, creating life and eliminating the thirst of the creatures. So what he means is that love is on the underground of our beings. In the underground of our beings, we have this reservoir of love that nourishes our soul. And that it emerges in a form of spring in our personalities. So he's referring precisely to the passage of the Samaritan woman. And so this idea that love is movement, it was also noticed by the wise people of the time of Jesus, and that's a historical reference that's actually really interesting. So, for example, they recognized at the time of Jesus the difference between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Both seas, which were not really seas, they thought were seas, but they were not really seas, they were like lagoons, right? So, but both of them were fed by the Jordan River, who came from the north. But while the Sea of Galilee would receive the waters from the Jordan, from the north, and would release them at the south, the Dead Sea would receive the waters from the Jordan River from the north and would close the waters in itself. One was alive, the other was dead. So again, the idea is that the love that flows, the love that leaves us, is what makes us alive. We spend our lives seeking to receive love, but what gives life and what gives joy is precisely our ability to love and not to be loved. And the more that we love, the more that we give, the more that our love is embracing, the more this little spring that blossoms gains strength and gains volume within us. And as the spring gains volume, the landscapes again of our inner world become less arid. And we are the first ones that benefit from all the love that we give. But another aspect of Jesus' love is that it's a welcoming love. So like the river, the spring that flows, it's there for anyone who is thirsty. The spring doesn't ask you, who are you who comes to take my water? The spring does not want to know. The spring is there available to everyone, even to the ones who throw little rocks and stones within it. So the spring, the river, receives the stones, receives the rocks, embraces them in the flow of water, and moves on. And love can do that because one of the offsprings of love is compassion and empathy. So when someone throws a rock, love is able to empathize. Love is able to look at the one who is the aggressor. And love understands that that person is just temporarily in a difficult place. Love empathizes. But love also has the ability to see beyond. So I don't see just the hostile person in the moment. Because when I recognize that my essence is love, I also see the other as love. And so love has this capacity. Love is very welcome and embracing of what comes because love empathizes. But love also has the capacity to renounce. And there is a passage in the gospel that many people don't understand too well. It's in the Gospel of Matthew 19, and I'm going to read. It says, "And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life." What does that mean? What is Jesus telling us to do? To leave everybody and follow him? Leave my father, leave my mother, my children, my house to follow him? And so the idea here is not to abandon or to renounce to our loved ones, but to renounce our desire to turn them into something that they are not. Because a lot of times if our children didn't come out the way we expected, if our parents are not the way we want them to be, or let's say we think that we have achieved an understanding. Now I'm spiritist and my family isn't. So sometimes to love is to renounce to the fact that people are in different places, and I cannot impose something that took me God knows how long to realize and to become aware on others. So love respects and renounces. So I cannot stop my evolution, I cannot stop my my path to wait for others, nor can I try to impose a time frame for people's process. So I renounce and I accept that each person has its own time, and I move on with my life. Because the more I move, the more I learn, the more I invest, the more resourceful I become to be of help for them when they are ready to be helped. So love renounces. And here there is an important aspect of love, which is respect. And again, Jesus da Cruz says that love, the respect, is a legitimate manifestation of love because it confers the other person. So if I say I respect you, that means, if I say that to David, that means that I recognize your existence, I recognize your value, I see you. I think differently than you. But a lot of times, we say that we respect others from a very arrogant place. We were told that we must respect. So I say, okay, let's say Angie and I have a different point of view. And say, oh, okay, I'll respect your point of view. But that means, if I say it this way, that means, okay, I'm just going to say that so we don't argue anymore, let's move forward, right? A lot of times that's the place that we are coming from. But when we truly, truly respect someone is, I think differently than you, but I still value you. I see you. I respect you truly. And then I confer you dignity and value, even though I have a different perspective. But you don't become less because you think differently of me, right? So I was watching a lecture from someone in Brazil, and she was referring to a friend of hers who, someone who is very politically involved and have a lot of, let's call it political enemies, right? But this guy is a very, very good person, and so he has the ability. Political enemies, not like literally speaking, just a lot of people who think differently in the realm of politics. But he's able to sit with any person, no matter who you are, how differently you think of him, and laugh together, and have a good time together. So this is a true manifestation of respect. We think differently, but I see you, I consider you, and I can laugh with you, we can be together, although we are very different. So that's one aspect of, an important aspect of love. So he concludes this chapter saying, respect is love with value. So I really like this little sentence, respect is love with value. Okay, and the final characteristic that I want to bring, not that it means to be all-inclusive, Jesus love, who am I to say about how Jesus loved, right? But just some considerations, is inclusion. So there are many ways in which we can look at Jesus including everyone under his love. But there is a passage that is particularly relevant, which is in the Gospel of John chapter 19, when Jesus is at the cross and Mary is at the bottom of the cross. I cannot imagine what that felt like. And she's looking at Jesus. And she will say to him, "My son, what have they done to you? My son, what have they done to you?" And from the cross, he takes advantage of that moment to leave us a very, very important message, because he looks at her and he looks at his beloved disciple John, and he tells her, "Woman, right there is your son." And looks at the disciple and tells him, "Right there is your mother." And at that point, what Jesus does is he turns Mary and John into representatives of humanity. And he tells us that love must include everyone. Love is inclusive. Way, way beyond the boundaries of our biological families, or way, way beyond the people that we like. So, just to summarize, let's go back. Movement, an intransitive verb, right? So no conditions. Don't look at faces, don't ask for names. Living water, so satiates. It's a spring of water within ourselves, so it is within us. It is a welcoming force. It is able to renounce, it is able to respect, and it is able to include. Now think about the world. Think about how we live. How much of that is present in us? And so, the good thing and the good news is that love can be learned. And it's again Joanna de Angelis who tells us that love can be learned. And in the introduction of this book, Mining of Love, she says, "Love waits patiently in the bottom of the existential river of life to be discovered. All lives have love in its intimacy, but do not know it. Each life needs another life, someone else, to awaken in itself, the profound meaning and value of this incomparable treasure." So we have love within us, but the way that we discover this love is through relationships. We need someone else to be in our lives, so that as we relate, we discover more and more this capacity within ourselves. And God is so incredibly wise that He created laws that help us to learn to love. He put us in society, the law of society, and He also gave us the law of reincarnation, which is this biological law at service of divine law. So through the law of society and through reincarnation, we're going to learn to love from many different angles. We are parents, next time we are children of the parents, and we have our relatives, we have our friends, our co-workers, we have the spiritual family at the spiritual center. Love in many shades, love from many different angles, love with particular challenges. And it is then through relationships that we are going to learn to love. So don't give up on your relationships, no matter what they are. They are a precious, a divine space to learn to love. And partnerships, in particular, become a very important area where we are invited to learn to love. I like to think of partnerships as a paddleboard game, frescobol. And I mentioned this before, and first time I was teaching my son Jake to play, he asked me, "Mom, who wins this game?" Because he always wants to win. And I said to him, amazingly enough, no one. This is a game where we need to stretch and bend and reach so that we can together win. We cannot drop the ball. So the more that we stretch, bend, and twist, the longer the game will last. And this is marriage. So marriage is this space where we're invited to do all those things, to bend, to twist, to stretch, so that the ball doesn't drop, so that the relationship wins at the end. So it's a sacred space where we're invited to take a step forward in our exercise of love. If we go back to the gospel, in the gospel we learn that first we are only instincts, and then we are sensations, and then we are sentiments, and then we come to the ability, the final step in the evolution, which is the manifestation of love. When our life is purely instinctive and sensations, we are very, very, very concerned about our own pleasure. And so there are still a lot of people who use others, right? Relationships where people are using one another, solely focused on their own pleasure. So when we evolve and we understand that life is not about my own pleasure, but I need also to please someone else, it's a huge step in our evolution. Because now we are considering that someone else. And this space of marriage will allow us to exercise all those characteristics of love that we talk about, right? Because if love is not moving, the relationship will die, right? So love needs to move. We need to learn without so many demands. So if my partner is a little messy, perhaps I need to give in a little bit. Maybe she can learn to be a little bit more organized. And so it's a balance. But it becomes a little bit more intransitive because at the end of the day, the relationship is truly worth it. So you learn to demand a little less and to give a little more. And then in this relationship, you also learn to be more welcoming. Some of these reflections we had yesterday, and it was a magnificent day talking about sexuality, but one of the things that I love, that I heard from Marlon and Andre, is that when you first marry someone, you enter a very serious obsessive process called fascination. When you first meet someone, it's a natural obsessive process called fascination. And then you go through disobsession. How do you disobsess? By getting married to someone. I just love this. I thought it was like brilliant. And it's so true. And it's so true. Because when you first meet someone, right, you only dress your best, right? You put your best face. But then you marry someone, and then, okay, the mask comes down, and you start seeing the person for who she is, for who he is. And I had a very unique experience in my life because, for example, I married first time at the church in 2001. And then after marriage became legal, gay marriage became legal in the United States, I married again in 2015. So it was a very different experience because I felt that for the second time, I knew who I was marrying and I still wanted to marry her. So love has this capacity. It becomes welcoming. It doesn't matter that she has her limitations, because I also have. So love empathizes, right? Love seeks to look at the best that the other person brings. So marriage is a divine, and Emmanuel says that. Emmanuel says that in the book, The Consoler. That love permeates all the relationships in family and in society, but it is at its best in the partnerships that we create, because it's a sacred space where all these attributes of love can be practiced and can be developed. So we got 2 minutes. I just want to finalize saying that in order to do that, even in order to engage this road of love, it's important that we realize and we feel that we are worthy of love. I know of a very well-known speaker. When I was preparing for this work, which was done yesterday, I looked for many lectures on the internet about love. And this particular speaker, who is very well known, I couldn't find one lecture speaking of love. So I wrote to him and I said, I can't find a lecture of you speaking of love. And he said to me, I don't feel I can talk about love. I haven't learned to love yet. And so I'm not perhaps worthy, right? And then so many people have come to me with the work in the area of sexuality. I remember particularly a guy who came to me and said to me that he was gay and he was very active in the spiritual movement. But after realizing that he was gay, he no longer did lectures because what? He felt he was unworthy, perhaps dirty, unclean, or something at this nature. So in order for us to learn love and to move in the direction of love, we need to feel that we are worthy of love. And so we go back to the beginning and just remind everyone that we are all divine beings and that love permeates life no matter how you look at it. And in first and in last instance, we are all love. And we all here doing absolutely the same thing. We are trying to learn to love. When Mary of Magdala looks for Jesus, she felt like that. She felt that she was completely unworthy of love. She was a prostitute, but she was thirsty for love. And Jesus said to her, your thirst is real. Your thirst is real. And he talks to her about the kingdom of God. He talks to her about the joys of motherhood. And she's listening to him. And at some point she starts crying and he says to her, what's going on there? Why are you crying? And she says, I'm not worthy. I will never make to the kingdom of heaven. I am a miserable woman. I'll never be a mother. And he will say to her, Mary, do you really think that God, who is pure love, will condemn any of these children, his children, to eternal suffering? Haven't you ever seen the spring blossom over a house in ruins? The house in ruins are the human creatures, but the flowers are the hope of God in each one of us. And she's transformed by his dialogue because although she was lost in darkness, he respected her and he gave back her dignity as a human being. She was seen. In the book she says, no one has ever talked to me in this way, in this loving way. And her life is very well known. And in the book Good News, at the very end, she passes away in the city of Ephesus with Mary, Jesus' mother. And Humberto de Campos, the author, describes her passage. And as she moves on to the eternal life, Jesus is waiting for her. And she has the impulse of throwing herself on his feet, and he says to her, don't do that. You have crossed the narrow door. You are coming to me to the kingdom of heaven because you, Mary, have loved so much. So this is the invitation to us. Let's love. Let's do our best to expand, to nurture this affective principle that we all have been given, the gift, the talent that Terry was talking about, that we all have equally in equal capacity. Let's start with small exercises towards the one that challenges us the most. Small exercises can be, send them a little prayer, can be, let me look at them and see beyond all the things that irritate me. Let me try to focus on the beautiful things that they have, because everybody has something beautiful. We're all beautiful in some ways. And in this way, little, by transforming our inner world, we're going to get in touch with this water table within ourselves, and our inner life is going to be an eternal spring. Thank you. Let's have a little time. Yes? No, let me just see if people want to make some comments before we go to get the kids. Regina and then John. Mm-hmm.
Yes, talking about love. Because love, I felt sick this morning.
Because of love, you felt sick this morning?
In a good way.
Oh.
Taking care of my grandson.
Uh-huh.
And then I planned to bring the oldest. He's so excited now, he's 4. He can come, not only because of that, because of pastel too. So we had a plan, everything. I woke up this morning, my daughter said, they are sick. You know, he can't go. And then suddenly I started feeling sick.
Mm-hmm.
And my kind of psychologist, so I was driving, and halfway I really started feeling sick, and I said I should go back because I like to hug everybody, so I better go back home. And then I thought, no, where are you going? You know, I said, where are you going now? You're not going to a party, right? So make an effort to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came.
Good.
I don't know.
I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you made it. Very
So no
good.
hugs.
Yes, yes. John?
Thank you for your presentation. Whenever I hear a presentation about love, I'm reminded of a Kubler-Ross story. Kubler-Ross is a psychologist that did Death on Dying and did a lot of work in that. She had a mother that freely gave away love her entire life until she had a stroke.
Mm-hmm.
Then she became an invalid, and she had to depend on people for everything, feeding her, taking care of her. And Kubler-Ross was so angry and said to God, you know, God, my mother gave the shirt off of her back her entire life, gave love away freely. Look at her. For the rest of her life, she was an invalid. One night, an angel came to her and said, you know, we really don't have to tell you what's going on, but in this case, we will. You see, your mother was an expert at giving away love. She just didn't know how to receive it.
Uh-huh.
And that experience was given to her so she could learn how to receive love.
Mm-hmm.
Just as important as giving.
That's an excellent point. And that's, we live in society, we are incomplete. And so God puts us in society that we can help one another. And that's, for many people, for all of us in some ways, it's a great exercise of humility. And to understand that our independence is in our interdependence. We need one another. We need one another in more ways than we can possibly think. Okay? All right, so now we're going to get the kids.